Hi guys, and welcome to Unit 3. It's good to have you all back. In this unit, we are going to be focusing on post-processing. That is to say that what we do to our images after we take the picture, we bring them into our computer and we begin to process them. Now, we're not going to get into any high-level or extremely complex ideas with regard to post-processing. We're not going to get into compositing or removing items from, such as the background from an image and replacing it and a lot of those things. Again, we're at an introductory level here to digital photography, and so we're just going to hit on some basics. And I have required you to download a couple of pieces of software. One of them is IrfanView, which I'll talk about in a second, and the other one is called GIMP. G-I-M-P. These are both free. GIMP is often touted as the free version of Photoshop, but it really isn't that. I mean, there are a lot of similarities between GIMP and Photoshop, and it's free, and it's a good way to kind of start into post-processing, just to get beyond the very basics. It's a great break-in. And so the principles that you will learn about post-processing through GIMP will kind of prepare you for those same principles in Photoshop or a much more expensive piece of software in case you want to do that later. So if you are you think you might buy Photoshop or Adobe Lightroom or one of those programs later on, this won't be a waste of time or an exercise in futility, because the principles you learn here by using the free one will kind of prepare you a little bit for how those other systems work should you decide to carry on and go a little bit further. And so we're going to go ahead now and just take care of a few clarifications with regard to your assignments for this unit and for the upcoming couple of weeks. So let's go ahead and dive into that. So just a couple assignment clarifications here. First off, the expectations with IrfanView, I told you I would get back to this. We're not going to talk about IrfanView in this lecture beyond what I'm about to say. This lecture is going to teach you how to use GIMP. The very final week of our time together, week 9, there is a YouTube tutorial that you're required to watch, and that is a tutorial on how to use IrfanView. I will say for now that IrfanView is just a wonderful, free, quick little program that you can get right in and right out of. You can view photos in it. You can do a little bit of cropping of photos in it. You can take care of batch files in it. That's a really big deal. You can batch process images, such as taking a whole folder full of images and resizing them all to a particular size. It could be 100 or a couple hundred images, and you could just, by the click of a couple buttons, you could resize them all within just a couple seconds. It's incredibly fast. Doing that process in other software is much more tedious and takes much more time. And so there are all sorts of wonderful benefits to IrfanView. I would not recommend doing any kind of heavy sort of processing with IrfanView. For one thing, it doesn't have a lot of heavy processing tools, but for the other thing, even some of the processing tools like lightening and darkening and contrast and things like that, they do not work as well as GIMP and some other software that we're going to look at. But another really wonderful benefit of IrfanView is just simply viewing photos. You can open it up and look at a photo and close it down in just a matter of seconds. And so I use it for that probably more than anything, because to open up Photoshop or GIMP or Lightroom just to look at a photo and then close it down, it takes sometimes a few minutes for those programs to open up because they're so huge. And so there are a lot of wonderful benefits to IrfanView, and I just thought you would like to have it, something to have installed on your computer that would be useful for you right away and also in the future. But I'm not worried about IrfanView for this first week. That's what you're going to be looking at the final week of class. And so this first week we're going to be looking at GIMP, as I said. And so I just wanted to share with you the expectations of why I had you download OrphanView. And as I said, there's a YouTube tutorial on week 9. And here's what I want to get to before we get into our assignment, our lesson, or lecture here proper today. And that is that from this point on, as I told you in Unit 2, we're kind of adding layers as we go with these units. And so now when you submit your photos, these final 3 photos are on the home stretch here, you're going to need to submit the technique that you use, the compositional technique, rule of thirds, etc. Your camera settings, as you have been the past 3 weeks, you've been submitting your images with these 2 things. And then from this point on, for these final 3 photos, you're also going to need to submit a description of what you mainly did when you processed it afterwards. I don't need a whole bunch of detail. I don't need paragraphs and paragraphs. Just saying, well, I lightened it a little bit here. I cropped it this way. I enhanced the color this way. And we're going to be talking about all that. But just basics, and let me know what you did for processing. Okay, so that's what I need for your photos and how I need them to be submitted for these final 3. And then I want to talk to you a bit about the quiz, which of course the final one is due this week at the end of the week, and then your response paper, which is the final thing that you will do for the class period. The quiz, there's accountability questions on them, as you've already seen. In question number 1 on the quiz, you will find, as per usual, will be me asking you, did you watch this lecture in full? Okay, so you're used to that part. And then very similar with the response paper at the end of the unit. When you write that final response paper, I will need you to let me know that you have done all the reading that was required, that you watched the YouTube video that was required, etc. Same things that you have been used to. Okay, so we're going to just move on a little bit here, and I want to talk to you. If we're going to start talking about processing, we have to have the following conversation. We have to talk about the difference between JPEGs and RAW files. Let me just, if you're unclear about what that even is, if you are shooting photos in your camera and you have not purposely switched your camera to shoot RAW files, then you're shooting JPEGs. And certainly all the images that you've submitted to me are in JPEG format, because that's where, no matter whether you shoot RAW files or not, you end up with the JPEG. JPEG is the universal, just kind of industry standard way in which we all share photos with one another. So no matter what process you may use, no matter what file type it may be, the image file, when you're done with it, when you're done processing it, if it wasn't a JPEG to begin with, you'll most certainly want to save it as a JPEG. So that you can share it on Facebook, so that you can print it, so that you can share it with other people, and it can be widely accepted in every application imaginable. And so that's the appeal of JPEGs. That's the upside, that's the wonderful side, and we have to have JPEGs. They're important. We're all headed toward a JPEG when we take a picture, whether it starts that way or not. The negative side of JPEGs, there's a few things. One of them is each and every time that you open and close a JPEG or do anything to it, you're actually deteriorating the image. And so the image has less and less quality as it gets opened and closed and opened and closed and opened and closed. And so that's kind of a negative thing about JPEGs. Another thing that is negative about JPEGs is that there's only so much that you can actually do with them. Once you begin processing, and you start doing anything dramatic to the photo with a JPEG, you start to deteriorate the image really, really fast. Have you ever been working with a photo and maybe some type of software where you could brighten it and darken it, and you had a photo that was way too dark and you wanted to try and brighten it, and so you brightened it, tried to brighten it a lot, and it almost turns like a fog, like a fogginess to it, almost like a gray color. That's because all of that data is to be able to do that is not there in a JPEG. It's gone, and that leads to the third negative thing about JPEGs, and that is your camera, when it shoots the image, if your camera is set to JPEGs, your camera will compress the image. JPEG mainly is a compression tool, and that's why when you look at a JPEG file beside a beside a RAW file, and you hover your mouse or cursor over it, and you get a little bit of information when you do that pops up, you'll notice a major difference in file size. Because a RAW image has all the possible data that your camera's sensor can possibly pick up. A JPEG wants to make it smaller, and that's kind of a benefit. Another benefit of JPEGs is they don't take up nearly as much space on your hard drive because they're smaller files. But once your camera kicks out and deletes all of that information, for example, my RAW images that come off my Nikon D810 are typically 45 megabytes. Right out of the camera RAW image. If I were to switch that to JPEG, I think it's like 2.5 megabytes. That's a huge difference. And so once all of that data is gone and it's compressed and it's shrunk down to a JPEG, you can never get it back. And so with a RAW image, you have the full palette of things that you can do. And so that's mainly the big differences between JPEG and RAW files. I'm not going to require you for this class to begin working with RAW images. We're going to talk more about it as we go on, but we're also going to be talking a little bit more about JPEGs. So I just wanted you to know the difference between them. I'm not going to grade you on your choice. If you choose to continue working with JPEGs, with GIMP, which is what the majority of this lecture is going to be about, I'm going to show you how to use the basic processing features of GIMP. If you decide that you want to just go with JPEGs the whole way through the class, that's fine. It's not going to affect your grade one way or another. If you decide you want to go with RAW files and dive into that, and some of you are already doing it, I know, then I'm not going to give you a higher grade either, but I would really encourage you, if you think that you're going to pursue this further. Now, some of you are probably just going to take this introductory class and you'll be fine with it. You won't need to take another class, and you'll just enjoy the hobby of photography from time to time. You'll take photos and you'll use some of the knowledge that you glean, and that's all you'll ever do. And that's wonderful. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. That's a wonderful thing. But some of you may want to pursue the craft of photography further. And if you do, I would encourage you to get involved with RAW files as opposed to JPEGs as soon as possible, because it's kind of like switching your camera to manual as opposed to automatic. It's like that in that you gain all that much more creative control over your final image when you're done, because you have the full palette of data to work with. And so if you're going to continue to use JPEGs for the rest of this class, then by now you've downloaded GIMP, or you were supposed to have, and that's all you're going to need. To work with JPEGs, that's all you'll need is to download GIMP, and you've probably already done it, and you get everything you need. And so for the next few minutes, you can kind of tune these next couple things out. If you decide that you want to work with RAW files and you want to begin that, then you'll also need to download a free RAW file opener to go along with GIMP, because GIMP by itself, even though it's a wonderful tool to work with RAW files, the really odd thing is that you can't open a RAW file in GIMP by itself. It needs another little app that works with GIMP. And so the one that I would highly recommend is called Darktable, and I've got the web address right there on your screen, www.darktable.org. That's where you can go and you can download this free raw file opener to work with GIMP, and then you can begin to use raw files along with the free software GIMP. And that's the reason why we're doing this. Now, this may seem tedious to have another app, but you're getting a lot for free, and you're going to be able to start working with raw files and kind of get a feel for it without having to, initially at least, buy Photoshop or get the subscription for Lightroom and Photoshop and some of the other Capture One and some of the other software that's out there that's kind of pricey. This is a way to get you in on the kind of the ground floor working with raw files at zero cost to you. And so we do need this other little app. And so when you go to that web address I just gave you, this is what you'll see. And if you look up at the top of the screen where I just put that nice big thick red oval, you'll see the install button there. And so all you need to do is click on that install button. And then what you'll see here, when you do that, and when you scroll down, you'll come to this page here after you click the install button. And when you scroll down, you'll need to choose your operating system. Now, this one down here at the bottom with the very well-known Windows flag on it is obviously Windows. If you have Windows operating system, you'll need to click on that one to install the Darktable app for Windows. If you have a Mac, I will put an oval around this one. This little X here is what you'll need to click on that one if you have a Mac to download the Darktable app. Okay. So just to let you know how this works, and then we're going to go ahead and just jump into the GIMP program, and whether you're using a JPEG or a RAW file, from that point, it'll all be the same. But just to make sure you understand how all this works, I want to talk to you about how you use Darktable to open raw files in GIMP, so you know that. And so first off, while you're installing Darktable, make sure GIMP's closed. I mean, you already have it installed on your system, but don't have it open. Make sure it's closed. And so after you have installed Darktable, now keep in mind, when let me just take you back here a little bit. When you click on one of these Windows or Mac to download the program, you'll get the standard down across the bottom that says downloading, and it will give you progress on how the download's going. And when that download is finished, you just click open, and then it will begin installing the Darktable program. And so after you install Darktable, then if it opens up, close it. It probably won't, but after you install Darktable with it closed, then open GIMP. Okay, and then you click File, and you click Open, just like any other Windows-based program, and then you go to a place where you have your raw files at. And by the way, this part's the same with JPEGs. You go to where your photo files are at, and you click on a raw file and click on Open, and you wait for the Darktable app to open your file, because that's what's going to happen. GIMP can't do it by itself, so it needs this app, and you just wait, and you'll see after a couple seconds the Darktable app will open up, and after a couple seconds more, your photo that you clicked on, the raw file, you actually see a thumbnail or a smaller image of it there on the screen. And as soon as that happens, there's all kinds of settings you can mess with there in Darktable, but for our purposes, just close it. Just close the program once it does that. And once you close Darktable, because remember, GIMP is open in the background. Once you close Darktable, GIMP will then open your raw file. I mean that's just how it works. Now, the first time you do this, this may take a few minutes. There's a lot of variables here depending on the size of your raw file. If it's a large one, like I was describing from my Nikon D810 earlier, that's a 36 pixel megapixel image, equating to about 45 megabytes for a file size. But depending on the size of your file, and the speed of your computer and some other variables. It might take a few minutes for all this to happen, but just let it happen. And once that is all up and running, then you're ready to process files. And so the next thing that we're going to talk about here, and I'm going to show you, is actually how you physically process a photo in GIMP. And so we're going to go right to the GIMP program with the file open, assuming you've already gotten that far. If you haven't gotten that far, you're going to need to be there for the next steps, because I'm actually going to have a file open in GIMP, and we're going to start processing that file, whether it's a JPEG or a RAW file, from there. So next step is really kind of exciting stuff. Okay, so let's begin part 2 of our final lecture. We are going to get started with GIMP, and there's a few things that I probably should talk to you a little bit about before we actually dive in and go to a live actual view of GIMP, because that is ultimately what we're going to do, and it's ultimately, where we're going to end up. But a couple things I want to bring to your attention. One is you're going to notice every time we click on a menu in GIMP, you're going to notice that there is a humongous number of options for everything in there. I mean, it really is a comprehensive program. I have friends who are graphic artists and are photographers, and they do it, professionally, and they use nothing but GIMP. I mean, they do all things GIMP, and they swear by it and love it. It is just a vast program. There's so much that you can do with it. And so as I said earlier, mentioned to you earlier, or at least alluded to, we're not going to get in all the weeds of every little thing it can do. I mean, I don't even know half of what it can do. But I'm going to just show you some basic things that you can do to process and really improve your image and your images and give them kind of a finished look, so that you can then save them as JPEGs and enjoy the whole process. That's what we're about here. And so another thing I want to bring up, so that we don't get bogged down with the details of this when we get to this point. In just a few minutes, we're going to jump into GIMP, and I believe the second thing we're going to do, among the first things, is we're going to adjust the color balance, and I'm specifically now talking about the white balance of an image. This is a really important concept for you to get. Again, I could share all kinds of details and nuances with you about the Kelvin scale and degrees of color and all of that. And so I'm just going to say this, just so you can grasp a basic understanding of how crucial white balance in our photos are. Most of you will have your cameras set on automatic white balance, and that's a good thing. I mean, that's where I leave mine most of the time, unless there's some sort of special application where I need a custom white balance as I'm shooting. That's not very often, although in the studio I do that because I know exactly what my lighting is like, and I know where I want the white balance to be, and I can set it with the camera, take all my photos at that white balance, and then I don't have to mess with white balance at all later, because there's no variance in it from photo to photo. But even though that your cameras are usually on white balance, and probably should usually be on white balance, when you come into post-processing, you may want to adjust your white balance, and so I'm going to give you a few little hints in GIMP on how to do that. So first though, what is white balance? The most basic and simplest way to understand what white balance is to view white as the color white. I mean, I know it's up for grabs whether white is a color or not, whether black is a color or not, I mean, that's an argument that's never going to be won. But look at white as the basis for all color in your image. You want, ultimately, for the most part, you want whatever is white, actually white, not off-white, but whatever is actually white in your image, you want that to be perfectly white when you process it. If it is, then all of the other colors will be right, because whenever you adjust the white balance, it affects all of the other colors. White balance is a setting in processing known as a global setting. It doesn't just affect the one thing that you're adjusting, it affects all of the colors on the whole color palette. And so adjusting it just a little bit can make a really big difference, and you're not going to want to mess with your white balance and adjust it very much. If you need to at all, you may not need to, but I want to show you that. And think of it instead of specific degrees on the Kelvin scale, think of it as cooler or warmer. I'm sure many of you, maybe even most of you, have decorated a room or been part of decorating a room, and you've gone to the paint store or to Lowe's or to Home Depot and bought paint, and you have talked about warmer tones and cooler tones. That's kind of the idea with white balance. As you adjust it, the whole photo will get warmer if you adjust it one way, and it'll get cooler if you adjust it the other way. And so that's the idea with white balance. I'll be able to show you literally how that plays out in just a few minutes. And something I just said about white balance is something that I also want you to keep in mind throughout this whole tutorial with regard to GIMP. And that is that almost all of these, little as much, you generally do not want to make wide, huge adjustments because, and you're going to want to remember this, if you make huge, wide adjustments, you end up with digital artifacts in your photo. And that simply means that you're creating things that aren't there by making an extreme adjustment to it, and it's very unappealing. Digital artifacts can show up as pixels that turn a different color, or the edges of things that get overpronounced or too dark or too light. And all of these things are the result of trying to push a setting or another to the extreme. And so the smallest amount we can get away with making adjustments in order to get the photo that we want, the better. And so with that, let's go ahead and move into GIMP. And looking forward to what we're going to do here next. We're going to take a live look, and I'm actually going to process a photo and take you through just some very basic steps. Okay, so here we are in GIMP, and I have preloaded a raw image here. It's already up and ready to work on. The way that I uploaded that, just to refresh what we went over loosely just a little bit ago, is you click File, you click Open, and once you click on Open, it gives you it takes you to, you can direct this tool, this opening tool, to wherever your photos are. Mine happen to be here. It's actually on an external hard drive. And the NEF extension you see on a lot of these in this folder is Nikon's extension for raw files. I'm not going to do that, and the reason why that I didn't show you literally and physically open a raw file in front of you is because it takes just a couple of minutes, and it would creates a little bit of awkward silence in the video. But if you do what I just said and you want to open a raw file that you have in a particular folder, you can direct it to that folder as I just did. And what's going to happen, because if you're working with raw files, I'm assuming that you have downloaded and opened at least once Darktable, that application. Once you've done that and closed it down, then when you open GIMP and you do what I just did, when you click Open to open that raw file, Darktable will open. and it will open the file, and you'll see a thumbnail of it, as I said, and then you just close Darktable, and then it takes a couple seconds, and GIMP opens it up, and then you can work with a raw file here in GIMP. There really aren't too many pieces of software that are free that you can work with raw files that are really worth using. A lot of them that come with their own opener built in, it's kind of convenient to have that, but it seems like it does a little something to them. And so this is a great approach to actually get your entire raw file into GIMP. What I will do, though, is I will open up a JPEG. For those of you who aren't going to be doing raw files, the process is the same, and we'll just literally do it, and this will maybe cement this whole technique in your mind. So we go to File, go to Open. It's going to open up to the same place. It goes right back where you were, so I don't have to go through and find all that. And I'm going to go through here until I find a JPEG, and I happen to know that I have some JPEGs in this process folder right here. See the extension JPG on the end of the file? That's how I know that I have a JPEG there. And so I'm just going to open this one, and this will happen rather quickly compared to the other process that we did. So here we go. Now there is a JPEG that I just uploaded. And so one of the first things that I want to teach you is this is actually kind of a panoramic. It's a long photo that I designed to go across two computer screens that are sitting side by side. So there's a couple ways that you can zoom in and zoom out on photos. You can press the control button and then just use your mouse wheel to zoom in and zoom out. It's hard to get it exact when you do that, and so my preferred method is to go up here to the View menu, click View, and go down here to Zoom, and come over to the menu that pops out there and say Fit Image in Window, and just click that, and there it is. There's the whole image. So I just showed you a couple things there. First of all, how to open a file of both types in GIMP, and then how to zoom so you can see the whole thing. Now, before we go too much further, I'm just going to go ahead and if you look up here where my mouse is circling, this will show you all the files that you are currently working on in GIMP. You could have a whole bunch of them. You could have 10 photos open all at once and just switch from image to image and work on them as you see fit. And which is kind of nice to be able to switch back and forth like that. The other thing I'm going to do, and I'm going to close this JPEG now, just because I don't need it there, and I'm actually going to duplicate this image so that I have two of them up there. So I'm going to click on the image file. And the very first thing, or image menu, I'm sorry, and the very first thing that you'll see there is the word duplicate. And when I click duplicate, that is going to give me two of these side by side. Now, I wanted to show you how to do that, but the main reason why I'm doing it right now is because when we're done processing this photo, I want to show you the difference between the original and the one that we're working on. And so while I have this duplicate one up here, I'm going to again go to View. I'm going to go down to Zoom, and I'm going to fit the image in the window, and that gives us the biggest view of it. And also it doesn't cut any of the photo out, so we're able to see the whole thing, and that's just helpful to work like that. And switch back to the original. I'm going to do the same thing with this one. Again, I'm going to the View menu, going down to Zoom, and I'm going to go over here to Fit Image in Window. Okay, so here is the image that we're going to work with. And most of the things that we're going to do now are going to be in the color window. As you can see, there's so many things, and you probably have all kinds of questions. Well, Brother Olson, what does this do and what does this do? Because you look at this this desktop here, and there's a lot of stuff on there, and I already told you every one of these menu items have so many different things on them. And another thing I should point out is that the things that I'm going to show you how to do them, I'm just going to show you quick and simple ways to do these next steps, but there are a myriad of ways to do the same thing. There's just all sorts of ways. And so GIMP has that in common with Photoshop, because Photoshop is the same way. But as I was saying, we'll come over here to the colors menu, and there's a lot that we're going to do here in the colors menu. Almost everything that I'm going to share with you comes out of the colors menu. And so click on the colors menu, and the order in which we're doing these things is pretty important. You can alter it a little bit, but these first couple steps you really want to do first. And so I told you that we would talk about white balance. And so we come down, go to the colors menu, and click on color temperature. Okay, so without regard to the Kelvin scale and all of those kind of things, the thing that I just want you to see here is if this original temperature bar you see here, that is GIMP estimating the original white balance of the image that as your camera shot it. And then this intended temperature is something that you can adjust. You can adjust both, but for now I just want you to show you what happens when we begin. And see the little arrow here? I'm just going to hold down my mouse button and slide that to the right, and just watch the photo, what happens. I'm going to go farther than I should with this. And so do you see how that gets so much warmer as opposed to cooler? A real way to notice the real difference, if you don't think that's that dramatic, if you see where I'm hovering my mouse now, there's this little box you can check called split view. And so what you have on the right of this center line is the original photo before we did anything to it, and on the left is what we just did to it. So you can move this and just see the difference that we made. Now I went way too far with it because I want you to see the dramatic effect of what adjusting the white balance can do and how easy it is to go too far. Now if we were to take this, and you can either drag it as I just did, or you can go somewhere along that bar and click it. If we were to go the other way, it would go the opposite extreme. And so what you have again on the right is the original photo, and what you have on the left of this center line is what we just did with the white balance. And so and the other thing you can do, if you want to get back to where it was and you can't, because it's kind of a pain to get exactly back where it was, you can click here, and come kind of close. You can see the upper one is 6500, we're at 62. One thing you can do is you can click this little arrow just to the right of that slidey bar we were just on. When you click on that, there are some presets for white balance, and you can go back down here for our purposes and click 6500 degrees Kelvin. It says D65, and that's the one that you want. So that puts it right back where it was. Now here's what I'm going to do with this particular photograph with regard to white balance. I'm going to warm it up just a little bit. Now part of that is because it was kind of a warm day when I took this photo, and it looks cooler almost than it was, but part of it, to be honest, is I also like things in landscapes just a little warm, and that's kind of more of a personal preference. Now the exception to my personal preference would be if I'm taking pictures of ice and snow. I mean, you don't want to warm those up. You want those to look cool, because they really are. So I'm just going to warm this up just a little bit. I'm going to take it up here to maybe about right there. Okay, actually I'm going to take it back just a little. Okay, this is just me now. You can play with this and have fun with it. And again, you can see the difference by dragging this bar back and forth. It's not nearly as dramatic. It's just warmed up just a little bit, and that's all I was really after, although I'm going to warm it up just a little bit more. Okay, let's see here. There we go. That's kind of how I prefer it. Okay, so that's color temperature or white balance. And so it's not, if you click cancel here, it'll do nothing. What you just did will have no effect. If you click reset, that will reset everything that you might have changed in this little window right back to where it was. If you click OK, which is what I'm now going to do, it saves the image just the way you did it. And so now we're going to go from color temperature to shadows and light. So again, we go to the colors menu, we click on this, and we come down here to shadows and highlights. Now, before I click on this, you see right above that is the exposure adjustment. And you might think, well, that picture's kind of dark. Let's adjust the exposure. In principle, maybe this is new to you, but in principle, if you're going to adjust the exposure at all, it needs to be one of the very last things that you do. Because there again, exposure is another one of those global adjustments that you don't want to do very much of. And it just might be by virtue of us making some of these other adjustments that the exposure in the end may not need to be adjusted very much. We might fix the exposure, if you will, just by virtue of some of these other adjustments. And so next thing we want to do is shadows and highlights. And so as you can see here, that brings up this shadows and highlights box. And we are going to look at shadows here first. Now, you can bring this up. Now watch what happens to the photo. This is shadows. I went really, really way up with that. And it didn't necessarily lighten the picture, but it brought out the shadows, and so everything doesn't look so dark anymore. Now you might want some shadows. Now I went to the extreme there, and I'm actually going to bring this back a little bit. Okay, and actually I did not want to do that, what I just did, so I'm going to reset these. Okay, I'm going to leave the bottom one alone, and I am just working with this top one. Now watch what happens. Now look at that, how that has dramatically changed the shadows. Okay, I am going to actually lessen that because it is, I don't know how much you can see on your screen, but it is a bit much. Okay, I'm going to keep it right about there. Now again, you can go down here and check this little split view box, and you can see the difference that has been made. This is the original photo. This is the shadows and lighting up that I just did. So things that are just black shadows have now, detail has been brought out in those. And by the way, if you're working with JPEGs here, you're not going to be able to do very much of this. You can do a little bit, but I mean just a tiny little bit of this. You're going to start getting some very negative effects with the JPEG image here for reasons that we already talked about. But you can still adjust the shadows a little bit even with the JPEG, and it's a very helpful thing. Okay, now the highlights. Now what I want to show you, I'm going to take the split view off there so you can just see. I want you to watch what happens to the sky over here when I remove some of the highlights. Now, this is a way that you can get more detail in a sky that might be bland. Now, I've gone too far here, and I'm going to pull it back here in just a minute. But you can bring out details in the sky that you couldn't see before in the image that might have actually been there in reality, but your camera recorded it as much whiter than it might have been. And so your sensor is actually picking up all these details. What I just did by bringing back the highlights did not add anything to the image. This is data that's actually there on the raw file, and this is one way to bring it out. And sometimes when you have a really bland sky like that, and it's almost foggy looking in a sense, you can get some detail in the sky by doing that. Now I'm going to bring this back because obviously that's way too much, and we're starting to get some digital noise there in the sky, and we don't want that. And so I'm going to bring the highlights back a little bit, and I do want some detail in the sky, but I don't want to go too far with this. I want a quality image, when we're done. Okay, so that's shadows and highlights. And I'm going to do the split view here so you can see the difference. Again, isn't that neat? Okay, so I'm going to click OK to save those changes that I just made. Okay, now that's shadows and highlights. Now next we're going to do hue and saturation, and I'll show that to you. So let's go again to colors and go down to hue saturation. You see there's two hue ones here. We want this second one that's called hue and saturation. And what this will give us is the ability to alter specific colors only as we see fit in the image. So there's probably some blue in the sky, because the blue is usually blue and yellow, depending on the time of day, are the predominant colors in the sky most of the time. And so we're going to check this little B here. See where my mouse is hovering? This little B here beside the blue box. And now what will happen as we make adjustments, it will affect only the color blue on the image. And so I'm mainly interested in the lightness or the darkness in it. And I really have no idea how much blue is actually in that sky and how much effect this is really going to have, because I am actually doing this right in front of you here for the first time with this image. So I'm going to do lightness and see how that lightens up actually the whole image, because the blue light from the sky is also lighting up the rocks. I'm going to pull it back now, and instead of watching what I'm doing, watch the image. Okay, this is close to where it was. Now we're going to darken the blue light, and yes, it darkens the whole image, but look at the digital noise I just created in the sky. It's very unpleasant. You don't want that. And so this is close to where it was. I'm going to lighten it just a little bit. It lightens the sky, but we still have some detail in the sky. But it's also lightening the rocks that we see here in the foreground as well. Okay, that's just the blue color. Now there are some colors that might not be so present in here, and you can just play around with all of these if you'd like to. But the next one that I want to bring to your attention is green. And even as I check the green box here to start working on the color green in the photo, it's important to note that green and yellow play off each other a lot. When you adjust the green, it affects the yellows, and when you adjust the yellows, it affects the greens. So there's a kind of a balance there that you can play with, and it's kind of fun to play with that and learn that. But right now, we're just going to adjust the greens. Now, I haven't showed you any adjustments except light and dark. So we're going to see if we want to lighten up the greens here a little bit. So everything that just turned green, you might say that's not that major of an adjustment, but let's look at the split view again. Okay, so look at the green in the trees. This is how it was. This is what we just did. So that gives us a really good way to see what we're doing. Now, I don't want to lighten it that much. Because again, you can cause digital noise. When you enlarge the photo, you really see that. So I'm going to lighten a little. But it would be nice if that green was a little more pronounced. And so in this case, I'm going to take the saturation slider right underneath the lightness one, and I'm going to add more green to it. Now we can go too far and things get very, very green there. And that's not too bad in this image. You'll notice it more in others. It's not too bad in this image because there isn't a lot of green anyway. So I'm going to leave that fairly high just so we have a little more green in those trees so we can maybe see them more. The hue slider, which we're not using very much, and I would recommend almost not using it at all, the hue actually changes the hue. If you go one extreme to the other, in this case we were on green, if you go one extreme to the other, it's not even green anymore. It goes through the whole color gamut as you slide the hue, and green's right in the center. So I would recommend only in certain occasions using that, but of course you're free to play with it. So now we're going to move on to yellow, and I mentioned that yellow and green play off each other a lot, especially the more yellow and green are present in an image. But generally speaking, in landscape photography and in many others, yellow, when you make yellow adjustments, it makes a big, big difference. There's just a lot of natural light in an image, gives you a lot of yellow, and even artificial light if you're photographing images inside, and you're using incandescent light bulbs or lighting the room, that's a lot of yellow. And so when you make a yellow adjustment, it can be quite dramatic. And I haven't seen what will happen with this image yet, but let's see. Let's look at the lightness of it first, and let's see what happens when we brighten the yellows. See, look at that. That is a huge, huge difference. And it's way too much because you're starting to lose some detail in the rocks. And in this particular image, I really liked the detail of the rocks. And the detail of the rocks, in my opinion, is going to be the subject of this image when it's all said and done. And so I'm going to dial back the yellow. I'm going to go to the opposite extreme now just to show you how dramatic it can be changing the yellow. So we just darken the yellow. Look at the distortion and noise we have in the lower part of the sky now. And then all the trees that we could see, because yellow and green play such a big role with each other, it just darkened them right down. And so this is close to where we were. I'm going to lighten it just a little bit. Okay, you're starting to get the idea, I think, on how all this kind of begins to work. Let's go to red, and we'll make this the last one for now. You can go back on your images and use any of these colors that you want. Let's go to the red for now, and let's just see what happens. So you might not think there's a lot of red in here, but I tend to think because of the pinkish, almost orangish color that we see kind of pervading through the rock here, I kind of think there might be some red we can mess with. And so I'm going to go to lighten it and see what happens. Now look at that. Your eye may not have naturally picked that up, but there was a lot of red in this image. I mean, if I go to the extreme, it's obviously way, way too much. But I think you're starting to see now why we don't want to mess with exposure until last. Okay, so we go back here. This is close to where it was. Let's just darken it down and watch. Of course, that's way too much. We don't want it that dark, but just showing you that red is having almost as dramatic of effect as yellow in this image, and that's unusual, but that's because the pervasive color of the rocks has a lot of red in it, I believe. So I do want to lighten it up a little bit, but I don't want to go too far. I'm just going to leave it there for now. Now, do I want to make the rocks redder? Do I want to make them less red? Let's just see if we increase the saturation. Now that makes the rocks a little bit more red. We can remove the red completely by sliding that and desaturating the whole entire thing. Okay, so this is close to where we were. I'm going to increase the saturation on the red, maybe just about that much. We're going to come back and crop some of that bottom out of there, by the way. And so That's why I don't want to go too far with trying to get the bottom part of it just right. That's because I can just tell now as I'm working on this photo that I want to crop a little bit of the bottom out, and I'll show you how to do that in just a couple of minutes. So let's go ahead and click the split view now, and this is what happened. Look at the difference now. You see the whole photo without making any adjustments to the exposure. We've lightened it up. So I'm going to click OK. And GIMP will sometimes take a second to process that. It was pretty quick that time. And the next thing that I want to talk to you about is brightness and contrast. And so again, we go to the colors menu, click on it, and then we come down to brightness and contrast, and we click on it. Now, one of the things that can happen as we start to brighten the colors a little bit. Now, if you had a really bright image and you wanted to darken the colors, then just keep in mind the opposite of what I'm about to say is true. But in this case, we had a little bit darker photo, so we wanted to brighten the colors a little bit. One of the things that can happen when we brighten the colors and brighten the picture in general is we start to lose some of the contrast detail. Contrast is the measurement between dark and light. And it can get out of balance, and we can lose some of the detail of the picture, even some of the sharpness, because the contrast isn't where it used to be, because we've altered some of the colors to be brighter in this case, in this image. And so the next thing that I want to do is I want to just kind of increase the contrast a little bit. Okay, let's increase it a lot just to get an effect. Okay, now that is, as you can see, that is way too much of an increase in contrast. And just to really amplify it for fun, look at the difference. But the one real benefit of looking at the difference beside that is we can see that we had gotten things a little bit cloudy here because there was so little contrast in the image. And so let's go back to where we were here. Okay. Now we didn't realize how bad that was until we just looked at the difference. So let's increase the contrast a little bit. You see some of that detail coming back as we do that? Let's do it a little bit more. Maybe a little bit more. Maybe a little bit more. Okay. It's not too bad. I think that's pretty good. All right, now, are we happy with the contrast? I'm going to say yes for now. Although it actually looks, now as I look at it a little more, it kind of looks a little harsh. So I'm going to back off the contrast just a little. Let's keep it right about there. Okay, now brightness here, you can sometimes, as you noticed, when you increase the contrast, it darkens the photo down. And so GIMP has brightness right here with the contrast, which is nice, a nice feature, because it can help you balance it out. But again, remember that little is much. Okay, so we're going to just increase the brightness a little bit. We don't want to get back to that kind of, detailless part, but we'll just increase it a little bit. Okay, we're getting there. Okay, now, very, very last thing, click OK to keep that. Very, very last thing, we go to the colors menu once again, and we click on exposure. We're finally done. Okay. And so now we are going to look at exposure. Now, I don't think I would mess with the black level too much on this. You're free to do that. I do think I want to brighten this picture up just a little. You need to be really, really, really careful with exposure, because the more you adjust it one way or the other, the more you have a chance of adding digital noise to this image through processing. Because your exposure was set when you took the photograph with your camera. That kind of put things, kind of anchored the exposure in a certain way. And to alter the exposure now, after the raw file has been, or JPEG has been completed, processed by your camera and now into some software, no matter what you do, you're going to add a little bit of digital noise one way or the other. So what it comes down to is how much digital noise can you tolerate in order to have the value of making the photo a little bit brighter or a little bit darker. And so I hope now you're beginning to see, as we're doing this, what I meant at the beginning, that just the smallest amount of these adjustments you can do, the better. And so now I'm going to take this exposure and I'm just going to drag it up a little bit. Okay, that's just a little. I'm going to leave that just like that, and I'm going to do one more thing. Okay, see, sometimes when you make changes you can go back and do more. So I'm going to, and again, I just want to show you the split view here before I did it. So this is the exposure that we just did. This is the way that it was, and you see that, and you're probably thinking, well, maybe it was, I liked the sky better the other way. Okay, so let's do a little bit of a compromise. Let's bring the exposure back down just a little. I still want it to come up a little. Let's click OK to keep that. Okay, and do you remember how we added detail to the sky? We'll come back up here to colors. Okay, we want to go to shadows and highlights. All right, and we're going to do just a tiny bit of this. We're going to take the highlights now and we're going to bring them down a little bit. Let's see, the computer's lagging just a little bit here, so be patient. Okay, so you can see there now, we get a little bit more detail in the sky, but boy did it bring out some noise. So I'm going to bring this back up actually to about here. And I'm going to say, okay. Okay. Yeah, my computer's gotten a little slow here for a second, so we'll let GIMP process that. Okay, thank you for your patience there. Okay, so one last thing that I'm going to show you what to do here, and that is to crop the image. So what you want to do is you want to go over here. If you go up to your upper left, you'll see all these different tools. This is a toolbar. We want to click on the crop button. Do you see this one here with looks like two carpenter squares facing each other? It's just a square there. You want to click on that. Okay? Now make sure before you do anything, after you click on that, you'll see some options appear below it. You want to make sure that you have the fixed aspect ratio here. You want to make sure this little box has an X in it. I think it defaults to that, but just in case that's not what happens, make sure that that's done. Otherwise, you'll lose your dimensional correctness here for the photo. Okay, and so what I'm going to do now is, I think that I want to cut some of this rock out of here, and so I'm going to do this. Now, because I have aspect ratio clipped, it's not going to give me the full width here, because you can't cut part of it without cutting the other, but we can kind of move this around a little bit. Although I don't like cutting the trees out of there, and this helps us with the rule of thirds a little bit by getting this little reflective pull out of the center square. I think I might just cut a little more out of it. Okay, now a couple things you can do. Now, I think I'm going to like this. We can always go back if we don't like it. I think that I'm going to like this. So if you click right in the center of the photo, that's how you save the crop. Okay, and so you can then, if you want to, come up here to View, go to Zoom, and then again, just like we did at the beginning, fit the image in our window, and then this gives us the full-size view of it. So now this is where I'm going to leave it for now. I'm going to show you how to save the image. It's a JPEG and all of that, because no matter if you already have a JPEG, then it will automatically save to JPEG. But I'm going to show you how to save it in just a second, and that'll be our last step together for this lecture. So what I want to show you now, though, is the difference between that image you see on the screen and the unprocessed raw image. So here's the one that we just did, and we'll give a second to switch over. So look at the difference. We'll see it again. Here's the difference. Here's where we started, and here's where we ended up. Just it makes a huge difference. Processing images correctly, not overdoing it, but processing them correctly is the same idea as what we used to do in the darkroom in the film days. The processing has always been a part of photography. We used to process film. You've heard of film processing, right? We would develop the film in a certain way, and the chemicals would be at a certain temperature, and that would affect the contrast of the film. And then we would take the film, the negatives, put them in an enlarger and project them, and the time in which the enlarger was turned on would determine the lightness and darkness of the photo. There are filters we could put in the enlarger that would change the colors or change the contrast. There are different types of paper that we could use, and different types of developers for the paper that altered all sorts of things. And so processing has been around a long time, and I want to talk to you about some misconceptions about processing in closing. But before we do that, I want to show you how to save your work. So you just go up here to File, and you actually want to go to Export As. You might think you want to do Save As and Save, but we want to come down here and click Export As. Now in this case, this image is a raw file, and so we want to make sure we save this as a JPEG so we can share it. Because obviously, I'm sure you probably know this by now, you can't upload a raw file to the internet and show it on Facebook or on a website or in LinkedIn or anything, or any kind of social network platform. You can't print a raw file on your printer. It has to be converted to JPEG format. And so I'm not going to title the file or anything like that. I'm actually going to save it in this processed folder right here, which is exactly where we got it to begin with. So I'm just going to double click on that. And the next thing I want to do, because as you can see, it's still a raw file, I want to come down here, see this little arrow here, and select File Type. Now, if you have been working with the JPEG this whole time, you will not need to do this, because your photo will automatically be a JPEG. You can just direct it to the folder that you want to save it in, and then just click Export over here, and you're done. But with the raw file, we want to be able to save it as a JPEG as well. And the raw file, by the way, will never be altered. You can't alter a raw file. If you alter it, it's no longer a raw file. So we are saving a JPEG, which is a JPEG copy of the raw file. And the raw file remains exactly where it was, totally unaffected. The work we are doing is actually on a JPEG, which is a representation of the raw file. So down here, we want to scroll down until we see JPEGs. See all the different types of photos. Here's JPEG image. A couple of things are going to happen. Click on JPEG image, and we already have it directed to the processed folder where we took it from. First thing you do is you click export. Now another thing is going to pop up here in just a second, depending on how finicky my computer might be in getting to it. And so it gives you this one final set of options that you can do as you look to export the file finally. And I would not mess with any of these right now at this level. You know, the kind of the beginning intro to digital photography level. But one thing that I would do, and this is just me, you don't have to do this, is I like to give the highest quality possible when I exported JPEG, and so I click that up to 100. Now you don't have to do that. I mean, the difference between 90 and 100, it might not be any real big deal there, but that's just something that I like to do. And then you just click export, and a little bar goes across there. And you know, you're basically done, and your photo is saved, and you know where it is because you directed it there, and then that's just kind of the end of that. Okay, just a couple of things to finish up here with. The first thing, and maybe we'll just finish with this for now. It's been a kind of a lengthy time together. I told you that I wanted to talk to you about this idea of misconceptions about post-processing. Now, you will hear people, and maybe some of you feel this way, but you will hear people say things like, "Oh, I don't believe in processing my images. I don't believe I'd take them straight out of the camera, totally unprocessed, just like that, and anything else is not really photography." Which is funny how people consider themselves, arbiters of, all things photographic and impose that on the rest of us. I'm always amused by the people who feel that way, when in reality photography is an art form and people can really do with it whatever they want. And so how you get to a beautiful image shouldn't matter. The finished image, if you create an image that people look at and they go, "Wow, that is incredible," or "That's beautiful," and of course that's the reason why we're all into this, is to get that kind of reaction. If you create an image like that, what you did to create that image shouldn't matter. A piece of art is a piece of art, however it's created. And so, but what people are really saying, and they might not realize this, when they say, I don't do any processing, I don't believe in processing, what they're really saying is, I trust my computer's microchip. Not my computer, I'm sorry. I trust my camera's microchip to do all the processing for me. Because that's basically what happens, There's no such thing as an unprocessed image. You couldn't view it unless some processing has taken place, because your sensor just simply records data, and it is until some kind of processor gets a hold of it, whether it's the JPEG compression tool in your camera if you're using JPEGs, or whether it's a processor like GIMP or Photoshop or Lightroom if you're using RAW files. One way or another, all those numbers that are in that data mass that comes out of your camera, they get processed into an actual digital image so that you can see it. And so for people to think that processing doesn't take place, and that's some kind of honor in that, that's not the case at all. And so I'm saying all that to say, as we close out this unit together, that post-processing your images is a wonderful thing, and it's just kind of the next step in your journey. We've worked on composition, started with composition intentionally so that we could jump right in and start learning some artistic principles in order to take better photos. And from there, the next step was using our cameras in manual mode and taking over creative control there. And now the next natural step is post-processing and how we process that image. And so when it's all said and done, we have something that is presentable the way that we would like to present it, and the way that is much more appealing. And so these are all just kind of steps in the journey. Processing is an important part of it. Okay, I think we'll just leave it there. Thank you for your attention and good luck sending in your photos. I look forward to seeing some of them. Hope you have a great rest of the unit, and we will talk to you somewhere along the line.